All right, so page 62 is all about using the square root method. So the square root method is used when you only have an x squared. So if I had x squared equals 16, okay, so remember what we talked about. What undoes something squared is the square root. So hence the square root method. You just have to square root both sides. What you need to be careful of is when I square root something squared, it just pulls out the value, right? So basically the 2 and the square root go away. The square root of 16 is 4, but remember, every time you do a square root, you have 2 answers. You have a positive version and a negative version. So that's the biggest mistake that people make, is they forget that plus or minus. Where you use the square root method is, let's say you had, this is like number 11 on page 62. So we have it set to 0. Okay, so there's 2 ways to do this. If you recognize this as the difference of 2 squares, you can go ahead and factor this. So remember, square root of x squared is x and x. Square root of 16 is 4 and 4. One's plus, one's minus. And then we set it to equal 0. So x plus 4 equals 0. X minus 4 equals 0. And then you're going to solve for x. So I have x equals a negative 4, add 4 to both sides, and I get x equals positive 4. That's one way to do it, if you recognize it as the difference of 2 squares. The other way to do it is with the square root method. If I bring this 16 over as a positive 16, I have x squared equals 16, and now I am right back to what we did at the very beginning. I'm going to square root both sides. I have x equals plus or minus 4, which is exactly what I have here when I factored it. So just remember, if you're going to use the square root method, you can only use it when all you have is an x squared. If I have x squared and x, can't use the square root method. You have to use either factoring or quadratic formula, which we'll get to. And you can either move the number to the other side of the equal sign and then square root both sides. Just remember, your answer has, you have 2 answers, a positive version and a negative version. Or you can factor it, and then you'll see you get a positive version and a negative version. Okay, let's do a couple more. All right, so number 13 is x squared plus 25 equals 0. So remember, you cannot factor. This is not the difference of 2 squares. This is the sum of 2 squares. Cannot factor that. So with this one, you're going to have to move your 25 over. So I have x squared equals negative 25. Then I'm going to square root both sides. You know what to do with your negative underneath a radical. This undoes that. So I have x equals plus or minus. Pull my negative out as an I, and then the square root of 25 is 5, so x equals plus or minus 5i. Okay, so again, negative underneath a radical, no big deal, just pull it out as an I, and then simplify like normal. All right, so number 26 is a fraction. I know how much you guys love fractions, so I will show you an example of that. Okay, so again, it has an equal sign. So the minute I see it's an equal sign, I can get rid of the fraction. So remember, eliminating fractions, you're going to multiply both sides by a common denominator. Okay, so now I'm going to divide. 4 goes into 12 3 times. I'm now done with my denominator. 3 goes into 12 4 times. I'm done. And then 0 times 12 is just 0. So now I'm going to rewrite my new equation by multiplying. 3 times 3 is 9, x squared. 4 times 1 is 4. 12 times 0 is 0. So now I have the sum of 2 perfect squares. Cannot factor it. So I'm going to move this 4 over. So I have 9x squared equals a negative 4. And I got that by subtracting both sides. Then I'm going to divide both sides by 9. So I have x squared equals a negative 4/9. I'm going to square root both sides. So I'm going to move over here. So x equals, I'm going to pull out the I, plus or minus, square root of 4/9. So remember, whenever you're finding the square root of fraction, it actually is just like finding the square root of part by part. So this can be rewritten as square root of 4 over square root of 9. So I have x equals plus or minus square root of 4 is 2, square root of 9 is 3, I. So it's plus or minus 2/3 I. Okay? And I think that's it for square root method.